I want to spend some time talking about what happened postpartum with me and with baby and with breastfeeding in my last pregnancy and how that has influenced what I'm going to be doing this time. Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel. You may recognize this outfit because I am filming this video directly after I filmed my 28 and 29 week pregnancy update. I probably just haven't uploaded this video back to back. But I wanted to talk today about my postpartum and breastfeeding plan of attack. This is like a major subject for me because, like I said at the end of my last video, I spent hardly any time actually planning and preparing myself for breastfeeding and postpartum. I got like the basics for postpartum. You know, everyone talked about these god-awful padsicles, which I will get into in a minute. I am not a fan of padsicles. Those things were wretched. But anyway, I was informed of them, so I had loaded up on like the witch hazel and the aloe vera and the lavender like oil and the pads, and I had like the essentials, right? And then in terms of breastfeeding, like I talked about in my last video, I had read most of this book by Lactation, The Womanly Art of Breastfeeding. Very informative and helpful, but I also feel like it led me astray given my unique circumstance postpartum, which I want to talk more about because it directly led to my failure in breastfeeding. So I want to spend some time talking about what happened postpartum with me and with baby and with breastfeeding in my last pregnancy and how that has influenced what I'm going to be doing this time. And I would love any feedback you guys can give me, criticisms, whatever. I've done extensive like reading and polling and Googling and checking out like Kelly Mom and the NCBI, is it NCBI, like clinical study research. I have done actual scientific research on a lot of these things, and it's the reason why I am planning on doing some things and not others, but would still love any input you guys have because the mommy community is very wise and I do not claim to know everything for sure. So a little backdrop on what happened with my daughter. God, where do I start? Let's just start with breastfeeding. I had full faith in my body, and I had read this book, The Womanly Art, and I knew that I shouldn't like pump immediately. I don't want to have an oversupply. I knew that I just needed to feed on demand. I researched and learned all about the baby hunger cues, you know, like the early signs that they're hungry. Make sure to feed them before they're crying type of thing. Lots of skin to skin. I knew to, like, if I was gonna have to pump, and this is a little later on, I knew that I should watch videos of my baby crying because that can help with the letdown. But mostly it was like, I knew that, like they say, only 2% of the female population can't breastfeed, and, you know, I knew to look out for like tongue ties and lip ties, and I had taught myself about different latches. Like I didn't spend a lot of time learning about latches, but I knew a couple. I kind of knew the basics, that kind of thing. So my baby was born. She was placed on my chest. I didn't know about the breast crawl at the time, but she actually did the breast crawl where she sort of just like, you know, like weaseled her way up and then was like looking, rooting around for the nipple. And that's when the midwives were like, oh, you can actually like latch her on now. And then in that moment, I'm like, oh, so soon? Like, how do I do this? How do I do it? What do I do? I didn't know anything. So they just like stuck her on, and it didn't hurt. It was perfect. She had always had a perfect latch. I think she had always had a perfect latch because every time I saw a lactation consultant, they said that it looked like she had the proper amount of breast tissue in her mouth. They checked for a lip tie and a tongue tie. She didn't have any. So I was led to believe that my baby had a good latch and that things were working. I didn't pump in the beginning because, like, the books and the online communities said don't pump right away, just put baby on and check for the diaper output. And she did have pee diapers and she did have poops. Now, maybe she wasn't peeing as much as she should have, but I had those diapers that showed the change. There's like a line on the diaper outside where, like, if it turns blue, it means there's pee in the diaper, and if it stays yellow, it means it's dry. I think that's the way it works. And, like, there were blue lines, so I was changing her diapers, and I was doing it, like, you know, and she was feeding like every 4 hours-ish. So I thought in the first 10 days postpartum that everything was going fine. I had extreme pain. I never had cracked or bleeding nipples, but I would have to bite down on a belt every time she latched because it hurt that bad on my nipple. Like, it felt like every time she latched and started sucking, needles were being dragged out of my breast or maybe shoved in. I don't know. It was very, very, very painful. But she didn't have thrush. I didn't have any yeast issues. I was using lanolin cream, and eventually, like, after a couple of weeks, it did just get better. And then I didn't have painful latch issues anymore. I never had mastitis problems. Like, I never had any of the big issues that it seems a lot of women have and still tend to be able to get through and breastfeed for 2 years. But we did have a problem that I was uneducated on and had no idea how it would affect my breastfeeding journey, and that was that my daughter had jaundice. Now, we did delayed cord clamping, and it was like very delayed. We cut the cord after the placenta was already delivered. I have since read that sometimes that infusion of all that red blood can cause or contribute to jaundice, just because those red blood cells, obviously they like break down and die and whatever. I don't think that caused the jaundice, but maybe it contributed to being as bad as it did get, but it got bad. So when we had a home visit from my daughter's pediatrician, the first thing she said was, you need to go to the hospital tomorrow to get this checked out, because just looking at your baby, I can tell she's severely jaundiced. She was very, very yellow, and she was very, very sleepy. And I just thought, I had a sleepy baby. Yay, I have a great sleeping baby. You know, I'm 10 days postpartum. My baby's sleeping fine. This is great. I've got this. I'm feeding on demand. We're doing skin to skin. Like, I'm just like an all-natural womanly goddess, and I've got this in the bag, which I didn't. And what ended up happening was my daughter had severe weight loss. I can't remember the numbers now, don't ask me, but she had lost well beyond the 10% of her birth weight. It took her a long time to even just get back to her birth weight. So at 11 days postpartum, my daughter was 11 days old, we went to the hospital, we were immediately admitted, and we were kept for round-the-clock care and observation for 7 days. And in that time, I was on a scheduled feeding routine where every 2 hours round the clock, it didn't matter if it was morning, noon, or night, baby would be stripped down, weighed, breastfed, weighed again, and then whatever discrepancy there was in the amount of, so like they can judge how much milk they're getting from the breast. Like, the doctors are able to judge how much milk the baby is getting from the breast doing weighted feeds like this, because they use very sensitive scales. So then, depending on how much the baby got from me, then I would have to supplement with formula to make sure that at every feed she was getting something like 60 milliliters of milk, one way or the other. I was having to keep very detailed logs about her weights and how much she was getting from each side, how much time she spent on each side, how much we were supplementing her when she was having diaper output situations, things like that. And then, of course, on top of all of that, she was having daily blood draws, and they didn't actually put her on a billy blanket or do anything else. They were treating her jaundice through food. And the reason you can do that, I mean, obviously we had her next to a window, so she was getting some light exposure. But the reason they do that is because dehydration can also make jaundice worse too. And so what happens is like this like terrible vicious cycle where the baby's not getting enough food, its blood sugars like drop, it gets super tired, so now it's not waking and able to feed properly, which makes it even more tired. And on top of all of this, it's not getting adequate hydration to help wash out the bilirubin out of the body. So the whole thing was, we need to get food and liquids into this baby. Otherwise, the next step, it wasn't a billy blanket, it was going to be a feeding tube. And to try to encourage her to feed, we were first like, I think it was like you massage here in their jaw area, or you can tickle their feet, or you can undress them down to just being naked. Like, those were the soft techniques we used to try to keep her awake to feed, because she kept falling asleep at the breast. And then eventually that then went to putting ice packs on her feet every time she fell asleep while breastfeeding. And even then she would sleep through that. So we were like this close to ending up with like a feeding tube. But she did turn a corner. She started to regain some weight and strength. She was feeding longer, but she was not getting much from me. Like my milk output was not changing. Like, she was just taking more supplementation from the bottle, essentially. And so I saw the lactation consultant many times throughout this 1 week stay. And I mean, I was told that, yes, like I had my baby in a football latch. I really liked that. It felt really good. She latched right on. Everything was fine. Like I said, no ties. She seemed to be like swallowing properly. Like the motions all looked correct. And I was basically told to just keep at it and everything will be fine. Now, what I messed up on was I was not pumping. I didn't start pumping until I was like 2 months postpartum, because I didn't know what I was doing. I felt very uncomfortable with it. I was very put off by pumping. I didn't understand the mechanism behind it. I didn't research anything about it. It wasn't something I had wanted to do. And then on top of that, I spent a lot of time Googling around, and I decided I was going to buy the Spectra S2. So I did that. I bought it off of Amazon, and it worked for like a little while, and then it broke. It electrically short-circuited. I ended up getting my money back, thankfully, but that didn't work for me. And then I had to rent a pump from my hospital, which was like 800 crowns a month, which is expensive. Maybe it was 800 crowns a week? No, it can't have been that much. It was the Medela Symphony, and that worked well, that pump. And then I ended up having to buy another pump, and I was so put off by Spectra because I felt like I couldn't trust it that I ended up buying a Medela Swing, and the suction was not anything compared to the Symphony or the Spectra, but I just was like, I was committed. I had it, so I was going to keep it. And I just couldn't get any milk. And by the time my daughter was like 3 months old, she had stopped latching entirely, and I didn't try, honestly. Like, I was so frustrated with the amount of effort it took to breastfeed and then prepare a bottle and feed that and feed that to the baby, and then I've got to clean my breast, and then I've got to pump afterward, and I've got to clean that stuff, and I've got to clean bottles, and I was so out of my mind with the amount of work that went into this routine of having to pump and having to breastfeed and having to supplement. It was like I was doing 3 things when most women just do 1. And then at 3 months postpartum, my period started, and my like meager supply, like I was able to get like 2 ounces, I think, of breast milk in a pumping session if it was in the morning. In the afternoon and evening, it was much less. But then all of that just like got cut in half. After my second period, my right breast stopped producing milk entirely. And then by the time I was 4 months postpartum, something like that, I had gone completely dry, and I just gave up. But there were so many things I didn't do. I didn't research galactagogues, or like I was eating a lot. I was not drinking a lot, but I had tried the blue Gatorade thing. I was eating a lot of healthy fats. I was eating oatmeal in the morning. I didn't have any supplements on hand because I was like new to Sweden and I didn't know what any of them were called. I didn't know where to find any of them. I live an hour's drive away from the nearest lactation consultant, so I sort of just gave up on that. I don't have any breastfeeding communities here. There are like parent groups that are organized by the health center, like my local health center, but I couldn't speak Swedish that well at the time, and I was like out of my mind with postpartum hormones and sleep exhaustion, and I was terrified to enter society, so I didn't utilize any of those resources. There were a lot of things I didn't do, and ultimately it led to a heartbreaking and guilt-ridden breastfeeding experience where I dragged myself through the fire unnecessarily because I kind of wasn't doing anything right to begin with. And I wasn't committed because, again, I just had no idea what I was doing, and I just failed. I failed at breastfeeding, and I understand now why they say you need a community of like women who are doing this, who know their shit, preferably like lactation consultants, or what do they call them, IBCLCs or something like that, like some people who are educated, because they can make this journey so much easier and support you during those times when you need support. There are so many things that can go wrong. I don't think, like, I feel like the number of stories that I've heard, like birth stories that I've heard where women said that baby latched flawlessly and their breastfeeding journey was a walk in the park, like the same percentage of people who say that are the same percentage of people who said, my labor and delivery went exactly as I planned, exactly as I envisioned it, and there was nothing weird or off at all, and I have no complaints. Like that, I feel like it's the same percentage of women who say these things, which is very small. For the majority of people, there are hiccups. There are things that go wrong, and if you don't have the support and the knowledge and the tools and the resources, you can feel yourself easily spiraling out of control. And I think all of this completely fed the fire to my postpartum depression problems. That's another story for another day. But this time around, I have read, I have listened, I have asked, I have made Facebook polls, I have joined all the Facebook groups, I've read the books, I've watched many videos on YouTube, and I plan to watch countless more. I'm just going to wait until I'm toward the end of my pregnancy to do that because I don't want to forget. And I've just sort of been like lurking in forums and stuff, kind of gleaning off common denominator information that people share. And I have this list of things that I have stocked up on or plan to do as my breastfeeding plan of attack starting the day that baby is born. So first of all, I have bought just regular lanolin nipple cream, which I didn't need with my daughter, but whatever, it's good to have. I also bought the Earth Mama Organics nipple butter because I've heard good things about that as well, so I have those. I have bought the gel discs that you can either heat or cool because I know that the heat can help with a letdown and the cooling can help with like really sore or damaged nipples. So I have those. I have a heating pad, and I also know to use the shower to help with letdown if I need to like do that before pumping. So I'm like aware of those techniques. I know that I need to be drinking 2 to 3 liters of water a day. Now, I know that some people say you really should only drink to thirst, but I am never thirsty. I could go a whole day without drinking anything, so that is a fatal flaw of mine. So 2 to 3 liters of fluids a day, preferably water, homemade electrolyte water, or coconut water. I know they say like blue Gatorade and body armor drinks are really good. I have read the ingredients of these things, and they are nothing more than chemically altered and artificially colored electrolyte waters with a lot of unnecessary sugar. So I have already ordered a shit ton of coconut water, which I have in our garage. And then I've got a bunch of recipes for homemade electrolyte water, which I'm just gonna like chug along with regular water. So that's my first thing, is 2 to 3 fluids of water a day. I plan on making, along with my freezer kits for postpartum preparation, I plan on making like a month or two's worth of overnight oats. And my plan is I've got like a ton of glass jars that I save, like peanut butter jars and pasta sauce jars and things like that. So I plan on putting in oats, and then maybe like either millet or quinoa or barley or like another good galactagogue grain in there, and then hemp hearts, flaxseed, chia seed, and just have them in these kits. And then the night before, I pour in some milk and I add in like a tablespoon or two of honey, and I do the overnight oats thing. And then the next morning, that is what I'm gonna have for breakfast every day, because I can't tell you how many times I've heard that like oats and flax and chia and things like that are really good at helping to produce milk. I have loaded up on brewer's yeast supplements, so I'm going to take those. I have purchased moringa leaf powder, which I read extensively about because I hadn't heard about it before, but I went on to Kelly Mom and I read clinical studies. Mama Natural recommends it, and a bunch of other people that I trust have said moringa leaf powder is one of those galactagogues that has been clinically proven to help you like support your milk supply. So I have that. I have purchased super high quality organic fennel seed, because I've heard that fennel seed tea, not fenugreek, but fennel seed tea, is really good with helping to support milk production. I know that skin to skin is the way to go. Like for the first 2 months, just put baby skin to skin directly onto chest all the time. And then when it comes to pumping, so my plan is starting day one to not go more than 2 hours between a feed or a pump. So if baby is not feeding every 2 to 3 hours, then I am going to do a pumping session. And when I pump, I'm going to be doing breast compressions, because I noticed that significantly increased my milk output in my first pregnancy. So I'm well aware of the magic of breast compressions. And then again, like if I'm pumping and baby isn't around or is asleep, then I am to listen to audio clips or videos of my baby crying, because that also helps with a letdown. I've been told that if you're pumping, you should pump for 20 minutes and then continue pumping for at least 5 minutes after the last drop flows out to help encourage more milk production. I have a Haka, which is a silicone manual breast pump, which you stick on one boob so that when the baby's feeding on the other, you capture all the milk and the letdown and everything that's going on with your other boob. So I have one of those. I'm getting a Spectra S1 breast pump this time instead of the S2, because it has the option of running off of a battery, which means I am going to be more likely able to pump whenever I need to without excuse. With my first pregnancy, like I said, I only had the electric one, and so I had a manual pump in my daughter's diaper bag for whenever I kind of felt engorged, but it was so painful and so uncomfortable. I couldn't get the like, what's the word I'm looking for? I couldn't like get the calibration right for like suction and everything, and I ended up just hurting myself, so I hated it. So this one I can do on the go. And then in terms of supplements that I am not going to be using, fenugreek, milk thistle, or like blessed thistle, I think is what it's called, goat's rue, or teas that have any of these in them. So like mother's milk tea. I am not going to be touching any of those unless I am in a serious pinch and need to try something else. I feel like what I have on my list right now should cover the basics. Hydration, diet, certain supplements like brewer's yeast and moringa powder that have been clinically proven to increase or help support your supply, and then just timing and methodology of feeding. I think that those in conjunction should give me the best start possible. I have heard so many mixed reviews, not to mention I've read all the clinical studies that have said that things like goat's rue, milk thistle, and fenugreek have very, very mixed results. Some women notice an increase, some women notice no change, a lot of women notice a drop in their supply. And so that terrifies me. So I'm going to stay away from those controversial things unless I need a last-ditch effort. Incidentally, oops, I also heard that Epsom salt baths, which a lot of women use to like soothe their undercarriage after birth, I've heard that that actually can cause dips in supply for women too. So if you have experience in that, if you could let me know, that would be great. I don't know if it's something about the magnesium or if it's just something about being dehydrated in a warm bath that maybe causes a dip in supply, but I've read in some forums that women say that it was the Epsom salt baths that sort of damaged their supply, and when they stopped taking the Epsom salt baths, things got better. So I don't know. But that is my breastfeeding plan of attack, and I'm starting that day one. So literally the day my baby is born, I'm attaching my boobs to a pump after 2 hours, if 2 to 3 hours have passed since my baby has fed. My daughter, when she was born at 8:30 p.m. and we slept until 6 a.m. the next morning, and she didn't feed or wake up at all after that first feed directly after she was born. And of course my milk hadn't come in at that point anyway. So this time I'm going to be proactive. I don't care right now what they say about producing an oversupply. That's the least of my worries, to be honest. I want a supply. If it's an oversupply, that's okay, but I want this to work, so I'm going at it. In terms of postpartum, I have a whole list of products and plans of things that I want to implement in those first months, but this video is now almost 30 minutes long, so I'm going to cut it out and I'll make a third video, an additional video just on postpartum. So stay tuned for that.